My name is Alex Yao, and I'm the marketing strategist for ALS Beauty and Personal Care. I'll be facilitating the webinar today. I just want to give a few helpful notes before we begin. If you're having any technical issues with our webinar platform, or if you have any questions, you can type your message or question using the chat function. You can also use the hand icon to notify me of your status, and I can assist you. Any questions regarding the webinar material will be answered at the end of the presentation. I'm going to hand it over now to Barry Reese, the USA General Manager, and he's going to introduce today's speaker.
Thank you, Alex. Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name's Barry Reese. I'm the General Manager for the Beauty and Personal Care Group of ALS, and I'm thrilled to have you here all today as we dive into a topic that's incredibly relevant in the cosmetic industry, the detection of PFAS. As many of you know, there's been a wave of new legislation at state, national, and even international levels limiting or banning PFAS in cosmetic products. And to add to that, the FDA is expected to release its own position on PFAS in cosmetics by December of this year, making it even more crucial for us to have reliable methods of detection. Today we have the pleasure of hearing from someone who's right at the forefront of this work. I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Jaine, a senior research scientist with ALS Global. Dr. Jaine earned his PhD in chemistry from the University of Waikato in 2016 and has been a cornerstone of the New Zealand R&D facility for the last 13 years. Jacob is known for his work across a diverse range of analytical challenges, from identifying metabolic markers in plant and animal diseases to verifying Manuka honey authenticity, quantifying dairy proteins, and now focusing on the critical field of PFAS detection in beauty and personal care products. So without any further delay, please join me in welcome Dr. Jacob Jaine to lead us through this fascinating and timely topic. Jacob, the floor is all yours.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Barry, for the kind words. Good to have you all here with me today to hear about this very interesting topic, PFAS testing in cosmetics. So without further ado, let's get on with the presentation. Okay. So we're going to run through a handful of topics today relating to PFAS in cosmetics, from some of the background as to why we would want to do this testing, through to what PFAS actually are, with a specific focus on cosmetics and cosmetic chemistry. We will talk a little bit about what the scientific literature has to say about PFAS. We'll talk about regulations from the global perspective. We'll talk about test methods. Then we'll talk about what ALS is able to offer for PFAS testing in cosmetics. Finally, we'll look at some preliminary results that have come from our testing, and then talk about who might be able to use this testing and what for. So, the background. Why are we here today? So, ALS is a global laboratory network providing a range of testing, inspection, and certification services across a wide range of fields. There's significant presence in the beauty and personal care sector, and there are key locations across the world, including in the United States. So here's a map of some of those beauty and personal care locations. I'm speaking to you today from right down the bottom right-hand corner of this map in New Zealand. Barry and Alex, of course, are in North America in the USA. And so despite being on opposite corners of the map here, we are in fact just a stone's throw across the ocean from one another. So ALS New Zealand includes an array of testing capabilities, in particular a research team, which I'm part of, that focuses on developing new and novel methods to provide analytical solutions across the whole sort of life science portfolio, from beauty and personal care through to foods and everything in between. Now, we've been doing residue testing for a long time, and we've been doing PFAS for 6 or 7 years now as well. So we've decided to bring some of that experience and knowledge to bear on this particular topic of beauty and personal care products. So we started this project in 2024 because there was a gap in the market. There's a need for companies and clients involved in the production and sales of cosmetics to be able to verify that they are free from PFAS and to be able to use tools that are fit for purpose for that testing. So we've decided to bring some custom solutions to the market for that and to make sure that they evolve and grow with time in response to external pressures. Before we go on much further, we have to talk about what PFAS actually are. Now, anyone who's been through a PFAS webinar or been to a conference and talked about PFAS or even paid attention to what's going on in the popular media has perhaps been saturated with ideas about what PFAS are. So many of you probably will know that PFAS is an acronym for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. Now, there is a particular chemical characteristic that unites all of these PFAS compounds, and it is that they have a high proportion of fluorine in their chemical structures, which is something that's quite unique for a lot of molecules. There is a particular scientific definition that gets applied to these, and the one that we are using is what is called the OECD definition, which basically says that anything that contains these CF2 or CF3 chemical groups in their structure can be classified as a PFAS. Now, that's a very wide definition, and there are a lot of different things that fall into that category. In fact, many estimates place there as being more than 10,000 different molecules that fall into that class, and that's a huge number. There are very few other analytical chemical problems in the world where there are this many members of the particular class of interest. And amongst that huge class, there's quite a high chemical diversity as well. So we find that there are PFAS which are solids, and we find that there are PFAS that are liquids, and we find that there are PFAS which are gases, and we find them in an array of different applications as well. On the right-hand side here, you see 3 pieces of clip art displaying just a few places where you might find things that are classified as PFAS. So originally, one of the first uses of PFAS was in firefighting foams that are used to extinguish fires on places like airports. They've later been used for things like stain repellency and used in Teflon pans, and there are even some pharmaceutical compounds, anesthetics and things, which themselves are wholly made of PFAS. So it is truly a very wide class of things, and they are very ubiquitous. They're found all across the globe in all sorts of locations. Now, the problem with that, and the reason that ultimately we're talking about it today, is that once these compounds are produced, they end up at some point escaping into the environment. That may be a more or less direct way of getting there, but ultimately they'll end up in the soil, in the water, and we discover now that there are some PFAS actually that float around in the air as well. So they are, unfortunately, a global problem that is largely unavoidable. Now, what the popular media keeps telling us is that we're seeing cosmetics turn up, PFAS turn up in cosmetics, which is a very alarming thing indeed, because anything that you are applying directly to your body, to your face, to sensitive areas, is a cause for concern, because you don't want to be ingesting unnecessary PFAS and you don't want to be exposed to it. So the question that we have to ask is, are those claims real? Is what the media is saying true? And what legitimacy is there to the claims? Should we be worried about them? So as a scientist, one of the first things that we do is we go to the literature. We look in the scientific papers, we look in the books, we look in things that are freshly published, and we see what information is emerging from across the globe in relation to this problem. So that's one of the first things that we did when this topic came up. What does the scientific literature say? And so we reviewed it extensively. And there is quite a lot of literature out there. Some of those studies are purely analytical, so they just focus on quantifying or measuring PFAS in cosmetics. And this paper by Whitehead et al. In 2021 is a really good example of that. There are also some other papers which are more theoretical in nature. So they look at what types of PFAS are claimed to be in cosmetics, and they look at how much cosmetics are produced, and they look at how many or what amount of PFAS are discharged to the environment as a result of using those PFAS. And this Putz paper is a really good example of that too. And I won't go through them all in great detail, but you can find these on the internet and have a look at them yourselves. So here's some clip art that we've produced from a large language model. We used ChatGPT in this case to produce a couple of clips of what ChatGPT thinks a scientist looking at PFAS data looks like. And I've generated a few of these throughout the slideshow, and we'll see some interesting comparisons between the different styles, shall we say, that these different models produce. I think these are pretty good. They're a good summary of it. There are some scientists that are concerned, like the woman in the bottom. There are some scientists that are perplexed, like the man in the top. The man in the top appears to have his piece of paper backwards, so I'm not quite sure what he's looking at. Maybe he's perplexed by the fact that he can't see anything on it. I don't know. Nevertheless, so what does the literature say? Well, the literature has some very interesting things to say about PFAS in cosmetics. So they are found quite reproducibly by almost every study that looks at them. And they're found at quite a wide range of concentrations as well. So we find that certain PFAS are there at very, very low levels, just trace amounts, parts per trillion or nanograms per kilo. And there really is a vanishingly small amount. But there are some PFAS that are in cosmetics that have been detected by these third-party scientists that are there at percentage levels. So that's grams of PFAS per kilogram, which is a truly alarming amount for any sort of residue of concern to be in a consumer product. So the threat does in fact seem to be real. It does seem to be reproducible. Now, in terms of what types of PFAS are being detected, there are some trends there too. There are certain PFAS that are found more frequently than others. Things like perfluorocarboxylic acids are quite consistently detected across the literature. And other types of PFAS are found in some studies, but not others. In terms of what types of samples they're found in, the literature suggests that the waterproof type cosmetics, things that are designed for long wear and holding fast and having good sort of film forming abilities, are potentially higher in PFAS. And so that's all reasonably consistent between all these studies. However, the one thing that is not at all consistent is how the testing is done. So amongst all of these studies, there is really no universally agreed approach on how PFAS testing in cosmetics should be conducted. So finally, what does the literature say about why PFAS might be in cosmetics? Well, it doesn't say much, actually. We think that perhaps that many of the PFAS that are detected in cosmetics are there by accident. So they're contaminants, for example, that might be in ingredients that are used during formulation, or they might be contaminants in equipment that's used. Certainly laboratory equipment can be contaminated with PFAS, so industrial equipment could be too. It's very reasonable. Or it could even be in containers that are used for cosmetics. We don't know. The other reason that PFAS can be in there is because they are, some of them, deliberately added. So there are some particular PFAS, which are really cosmetic-specific ones that are largely used in the cosmetic industry and nowhere else, that are deliberately put into cosmetics that are used during formulation because they exert some kind of functional effect which is useful for the product. And you can find these. They're on labels of certain cosmetics, and the US FDA has a list of them on their website. They're well known, and we know that they contain these long fluorinated chains that cause people problems. So there's at least two reasons there why they could or might be found in cosmetics. Now, regulations. So the scientists say that there are cosmetics in PFAS, the next step is always for regulators to come up with some set of rules about what PFAS should or shouldn't be in there. So globally, there is an array of regulations which are evolving. Few or none of them are in force yet, but will be very soon. The most relevant one to North America is this MOCRA Act, Modernization of Cosmetics Regulation Act, which, amongst other things, compels the US FDA to provide some guidance about PFAS in cosmetics, which ones and potentially what levels. We don't know. That advice is yet to come out. In New Zealand, we have this thing called the Cosmetics Products Group Standard, and that also restricts PFAS. France has regulations. There are regulations evolving in Asia. And there are lots of private companies and organizations, so big retailers, who are evolving their own guidelines independently for what PFAS may or may not be in certain types of products. Now, here's two illustrations from different large language models about what a regulator drafting a PFAS law might look like. The top one there is ChatGPT again, which provides a almost universally recognized art style. And the bottom one, which is a slightly different quality of design, comes from the Claude AI. So gold star to Claude for trying, but it does look a little bit like a 5-year-old's drawing in Microsoft Paint or something. So in terms of what's in these regulations, they are in many cases fairly non-specific or even somewhat vague, you might say. They often simply say, no PFAS. That's it. They don't list which PFAS, they don't list what concentrations of PFAS, and they certainly don't list how to measure or detect these PFAS. And that's a very, very different position to a number of other industries. The most widely developed, the environmental testing industry, has very specific guidelines by comparison. They say that there shall be no PFOA, and there shall be no PFOS, and there shall be no X, Y, and Z, and the concentrations must not be more than X, and here's a test method that you can use. Now, cosmetics is not like that. None of these regulations have that. They just say none, full stop, nada, not allowed. And that puts us in somewhat of a difficult position. Because one of the first things that scientists want when we're developing new methods is to know what we're meant to be testing, and how we're to test it, and what concentrations to look for. So this is a very unusual situation indeed. Now, one of the things that we can do, of course, is look at what existing test methodologies are available in other testing areas. So most of the PFAS testing that gets done across the world in these other areas is done in accordance with some sort of a reference method. So it's a protocol that's been written by a well-meaning industry body or some sort of organization that describes a set of processes that a laboratory can go through to take a sample of something, process it in a particular designated fashion, and produce test results which can be relied on and which are fit for purpose, which measure the correct things and measure them in the correct ways and give you results that are useful, effectively. There are lots of those in these other areas. Here are just a series of acronyms that, as you become more involved in PFAS testing, you'll be accustomed to seeing. On the right-hand side there, you have a list of methods that the environmental test sector uses, and there are EPA methods, and there are ASTM methods, and there are ISO methods, and there are abbreviations as far as the eye can see. So they have a really good, really advanced set of guidelines for environmentally relevant samples, like soils and waters, but they don't have anything for cosmetics. Now, there are other industries as well. The textile industry has their own test methods. There's EN and ISO methods. There's a handful of them for testing leathers and fabrics, but they don't have any for cosmetics. The food testing sector has their own test methods as well. There is an FDA PFAS testing method for foods, but it doesn't tell you how to test cosmetics. And in the cosmetic sector, silence, there's nothing. The blue box for cosmetics there is deliberately left blank because there are no existing test methodologies which are universally accepted for testing PFAS. So what that means is that anyone who does want to test PFAS in cosmetics is left with two choices. You can either repurpose an existing method from somewhere else, which has some pros and some cons, or you can develop your own method. Now we've got a series of articles that we've written on this topic and why you may or may not want to do this. So we have an industry alert and a PFAS testing gaps flyer, which are available to everyone. And you can find those, I believe, on the website or message us to get a copy of those. And they talk in some detail about why you would or would not want to do some of these things. For example, why you may not want to repurpose a test method from another industry, because they're not designed for it. If you take a method that is designed for a soil and you put a sample of mascara through it, you can process it according to those instructions and you can get a number, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee that it's meaningful. In fact, it may be misleading or wrong. So because of some of the technical complications with these sample types, high lipid, oil, fat content, high pigment content, high surfactant content, all of these unique chemical characteristics of cosmetics, they don't necessarily work with these existing methods. And on top of that, some of the analytes that are in these existing test methods are also not relevant to cosmetics. There are more appropriate ones to be looking for. So what we think at ALS is that if you have a unique problem, you need a unique solution to that problem. And so that's what we've decided to provide. So on to what the ALS service actually is. So currently, we are putting to market two solutions for PFAS testing in cosmetics. Now, the first one of these is what's called a total fluorine measurement method. And we'll talk in a little bit more detail about these in the coming slides. So this total fluorine method, TF, is, we think, going to be the most versatile and the most useful tool for screening cosmetic samples and ingredients for the absence of PFAS. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more soon. The second method that we're going to be offering is a targeted PFAS method, an LC-MS method, which can be used to measure particular individual PFAS of concern. Again, we'll cover that in more detail in the coming slides. So, this total fluorine method, like I said just before, we really think this is going to be the primary analytical tool for most people, in most cases, involved in testing PFAS in cosmetics. It will be the first tool that you will want to ask us for, and we think it will be the tool that you use for 90% of your testing. And the way that it works is like this. You take a little sample of cosmetics and you basically burn in a very controlled fashion in this fancy combustion ion chromatography machine. You burn the sample and you capture the fluorine that comes off it, and you capture that as a liquid and then test it using ion chromatography. And then you can infer from that result how much PFAS may have been in the original sample. Now, there's some complications to this. Because like I said before, the fluorine and fluorochemical family is quite big, and the PFAS family in particular is quite large. And this method theoretically can capture almost any compound that is fluorinated. So that's called the fluorochemical family. Anything with a fluorine in it is a fluorochemical. And any of those compounds that are volatile or can be burned are amenable to detection using this method. So that includes anything that we would class as an organofluorine molecule. so anything that has a carbon-fluorine bond in it. And a subset of those compounds are all of the PFAS molecules that we're talking about. But that does also mean that it can, in some cases, detect molecules that are not PFAS, that don't formally meet that OECD definition that we talked about before. But as long as there are not any of these non-PFAS fluorochemicals in a cosmetic sample, which is nearly always the case, then the total fluorine is a good surrogate for the presence of PFAS that are in there. And in fact, we think it is the only analytical approach which can confirm that no PFAS at all of any type are in a sample at a given detection limit. And that's why it's going to be the most useful tool for a lot of people, we think. Now, our method is validated to an internationally accepted level, and it's been tested repeatedly on a range of materials that are surrogates for cosmetics that are free of fluorine, so we can test to ensure that the method is robust and reproducible and accurate. So it is highly validated, which means that it is a highly trustworthy approach as well. So the limit of reporting that we get using this method, so that's how low of a concentration we can pick up, is 1 milligram per kilogram, 1 ppm for total fluorine. And because all of the regulations either don't specify a limit of reporting or a detection limit, or they specify one which is very, very high, this is compliant with all of the current regulations that we're aware of in the marketplace. Now, in terms of what you need for this, it is a very small sample of cosmetics. So we ask for 10 grams of material, which equates to probably about a blob the size of your thumb, give or take. What we do recommend is that any sort of subsampling is avoided, because anytime you manipulate a sample and move it between containers and touch it and that sort of thing, you risk contaminating it. So a small subsample, ideally provided in an original container, is the best option for this type of testing. Now, the second tool that we have available to us is this targeted PFAS analysis method. So targeted PFAS testing is something which, instead of looking for any and all PFAS, it looks for a particular set of PFAS, and it can uniquely and unequivocally identify and quantify those particular molecules. So we think this targeted approach is going to be quite useful if you do a CIC test and it comes out positive. You might want to investigate why it's positive. Is it positive because there are some PFAS of concern that are in there? Or is it something that's not worth worrying about? So we think it will be useful in a smaller proportion of cases, but useful to people nonetheless. And it can, of course, be useful if you want to explicitly check for the presence of some of the worst PFAS, things like PFOA and PFOS. So this method is an LC-MS method, liquid chromatography with mass spectrometry. And the method basically works by taking a sample of cosmetics, you extract or pull the PFAS out of that sample using a mixture of organic solvents, and then you take that extract and you do what's called cleanup to it. So you process it to remove some of the interferences and other compounds in that extract which can interfere with measuring those PFAS. And by doing that cleanup, you make the results more accurate, you make them more reproducible, and you allow, or you facilitate detection at a much lower level as well. So we do that, and then we quantify them against these isotopologs or isotopically labeled standards, which allows us to get some very, very accurate, very low results for cosmetics. Now, here's an illustration of what an LLM thinks this looks like. I think this came from Google Gemini, this particular one. It's not too far off what an LC-MS system might look like. To anyone who's a laboratory scientist, you'll recognize the table there and the box sitting on top of it with some pipes going in and out. Ideally, not everyone's lab coat is that dirty, although after you've worked with cosmetics in the lab for a while, you do occasionally find a pink stain here or there on it, so guilty as charged in that case. So what does our method measure? Well, it measures 24 different PFAS. So we're starting with 24 that have been identified in the literature as things that can be detected and have been detected in cosmetics. So it includes a range of different compounds. There are perfluorocarboxylic acids, like we've mentioned before, and it includes PFOA, which is an important one. There are some perfluorosulfonic acids, so it includes PFHXS and PFOS, and these three are all regulated molecules in an array of different testing areas. They're what's classified as persistent organic pollutants, so they are some of the worst in terms of PFAS. And we also include some molecules called fluorotelomere sulfonates and some sulfonamido substances. So if you want the full list, get in touch. We can provide you a summary of that with the detection limits for those as well. So this method also is very, very highly validated. Because we have chosen not to repurpose an analytical method, we've chosen to build a custom solution deliberately designed for cosmetics with cleanup that works for cosmetics and with analytes that can be found in cosmetics. We've decided to put more effort into validating it than many laboratories might choose to. So we've tested this and validated this extensively on 10 different types of cosmetics, things predominantly that you might apply to your face, sensitive areas around the eyes, around the lips, cosmetic types that might be prone to ingestion or consumption, where there's a clear route for any PFAS that are in those types of samples to be ingested and find their way into the body. So we've looked at all sorts of things. We've looked at mascaras, we've looked at lipsticks and lip glosses, we've looked at sunscreens, we've looked at eyeshadows, we've looked at all sorts of different things. And we find that this method works really well for all of those sample types. There are a couple of technical complications. Like I mentioned before, there is some unique chemistry that is specific to cosmetics that causes some issues. And all that means really is that we get a slightly higher reporting limit for those particular compounds in those particular sample types. The standard reporting limit, though, is 0.0001 milligram per kilo, which is 100 parts per trillion, so 0.1 ppb for anyone who likes to work in that in those units. So the more complicated sample types have a slightly higher reporting limit, but the default is 0001, which is very, very low. It's lower than what is demanded in many testing areas. But again, because these are compounds which are on the face, in sensitive areas, prone to ingestion, we think people deserve to have a low detection limit for this type of method. In terms of sample volume requirements, same thing. So 10 grams of sample is enough. We advise not subsampling it, so don't scoop it out of a container with a spoon from your kitchen and put it into a random jam jar. Send in original containers, use verified, clean HDPE bottles, things like that. Every time you manipulate or subsample things for cosmetics, for PFAS testing, it is a risk to cross-contamination. So try to avoid that where possible. Now, in terms of preliminary results, we thought that it would be interesting to take these methods, collect some samples from the marketplace, and see whether or not we could find PFAS in these real live samples. The scientific literature says it's there, so let's reproduce it. Let's see what we can find with our own tools. So that's what we did. We went and collected 80 samples of cosmetics from stores across New Zealand, and those samples were produced internationally. So they're not New Zealand-specific cosmetics necessarily. They're produced in in China, they're produced in India, they're produced in France, they're produced in Thailand, they're produced in the United States, they're produced all across the globe. And what we found from testing these samples is that we found PFAS in 18% of them. So as to whether or not the scientific literature is correct, it looks like, in fact, it is. And this is what we get. So when we break it down by sample type, we were finding PFAS most commonly in moisturizers, eyeshadows, and powders. So things like eyeshadows, powder foundations, things like that. And in many cases, that we were finding them in excess of a quarter of the samples. In fact, with moisturizer, we were finding PFAS in more than half of the samples that we tested, at concentrations above 100 parts per trillion, which is that detection limit of our method. Now, last time I showed someone this data, they said, please give us some good news. Can we learn about something that doesn't have PFAS in it? And the good news here is that we didn't find any PFAS in the serum samples or mascara samples that we tested. So there is definitely some cosmetics that don't have PFAS in them, but there certainly is some that do. Now, this is going to vary depending on which samples you test and perhaps which market you get them from and that sort of thing. But like I said, it does in fact seem to be the case that there are PFAS in them. Now, in terms of which PFAS are in these samples, well, that's interesting. PFOA, which is a banned prohibited substance, it's a persistent organic pollutant, was the most commonly detected one. And so this is what the breakdown looked like when we group it by analyte. So each of the bars there, you can see, indicates a detection of a particular PFAS type in one or more of the samples. And most of those bars are clustered in the middle there in the perfluorocarboxylate category, so the PFCAs. And each of these is detected at a frequency of a few percent. And that, of course, is lower than what's in the percentage of positive samples in the graph there on the left. So what that means functionally is that when you do find a sample that's positive for PFAS, it's rather than many different PFAS. But we didn't find, for example, any of the perfluorosulfonates. We didn't find any of these sulfonamido substances. And we found almost none of the fluorotellamous sulfonates. And those are all molecules that are detected quite widely and with other methods and other sample types as well. So again, it speaks to the idea that the cosmetic situation and what's found in cosmetics is different from what's being found in other sample types, in other areas, and other sectors, and it reinforces that idea that you do really need a sort of a customized solution for this type of testing. Now, in terms of who might use this method and what for, so we think that these tools are going to be most useful for professionals who are working in the cosmetic and beauty and personal care sector, for companies who are formulating cosmetics or who are marketing cosmetics or selling cosmetics and who want to keep consumers safe from the threat of PFAS being in their products. Here's another illustration from Google Gemini of someone bartering to get some lipstick into a new market and people scrutinizing the certificates to see whether or not it contains PFAS. So the people who might be involved in this is people like regulatory affairs specialists. So if it is your job to look after what other markets are concerning themselves with and what is being regulated, then these are going to be useful tools for you to look at, and indeed even useful tools to use on your products to check that there won't be any barriers to entry into particular markets. We think this will also be useful for people who are formulating new cosmetics and developing and enhancing existing products. So new product development people, NPD teams, when you're using new ingredient streams or ingredients from new manufacturers. You may want to, for example, screen them using these tools to ensure they don't have PFAS in them and you don't inadvertently introduce PFAS into a product that is being manufactured. And on the other side of the coin, if you are a supplier of ingredients, you might want to screen all the ingredients that you are selling to make it an attractive proposition for companies to buy your ingredients. You can demonstrate that they have no PFAS in them by presenting a certificate that proves it unequivocally, and that just smooths the whole process for everyone. Now, anyone else, of course, can use these tools. We're not prohibiting them to these types of people. So members of the public can potentially do this. Environmental consultants, people concerned about the discharge of cosmetics and cosmetic waste into the environment, can use these. Or people like consumer affairs experts who are looking for what's in the market and whether or not it's true to label and that sort of thing might want to use these tools as well. So we think they'll be quite widely used potentially. Anyone can use them. And if you would like to, just get in touch and we can give you all the information that you need to get that testing underway. So that is the end of my presentation, and that's all I have to tell you about PFAS in cosmetics today. Like I said, if you want to get in touch, the first person to talk to is Barry, who introduced me. So here is Barry's details here. And Barry will be able to point you in the correct direction to get the testing underway and to make sure you're getting what you need. And if there are particular technical questions in relation to the testing, feel free to contact me as well. And there are my details on the bottom there. So thank you all very much for your time. It was a pleasure to talk about this today. And thank you very much.
Thanks, Jacob. We're going to open up the forum for questions now. If you have any questions, you can please write them out using the Q&A function in the toolbar at the top of the webinar. Attendees can also see all submitted questions using this window. So I'm just going to give a few moments for everybody to submit any kinds of questions, and I'll review some brief notes while we wait. This webinar presentation has been recorded. All participants of this webinar will receive a follow-up email once the recording is available to view. We also post our webinars on our ALS YouTube channel in the webinar playlist. I encourage you to find a wide range of video resources and past webinar presentations available there. Also, please follow the ALS Beauty page on LinkedIn as we post announcements and registration links to future webinars and other valuable resources and updates. I'm going to hand it over to Barry, who's going to help facilitate the Q&A session.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you, Alex. I don't see any questions. Did anybody have any?
These are the best type of questions, the easy ones, when,
when
no one has any.
Here, can you detect TFA?
So we don't currently have TFA in our method, at least not the standard method that we're rolling out globally, but we do have a number of laboratories in the network who have existing methods for TFA in other sample types. So we, for example, have an R&D TFA method here that we can apply to cosmetics, and some of our other labs do TFA testing as well. Yep.
And there was also ultra short chain PFAs.
Yep, sure. So TFA is one of those ultra short PFAS. There are a handful of others that people are interested in measuring. So our method goes down to C4. It contains PFBA, which is the shortest PFAS in our method, but it's probably one of the longer chain ultra short PFAS. So they go down to C4, C3, C2, and in some cases C1, so 1 carbon. Again, there are other laboratories in our network who have some capability around that, not for cosmetics, but for other sample types. And if people are interested in that, then we can explore that together.
Great. Heather has a question. She said, did you look at the mass balance of fluorine between total fluorine and what was found in target analysis?
Oh, great question, Heather. No, we didn't get the opportunity to, actually. So that will be a next step for us. And for anyone who wants to see that, I would recommend coming to our next webinar that we hold on the topic, where hopefully we will have some interesting information to compare total fluorine versus targeted quantitation. And I suspect they won't necessarily be exactly the same. There may be a proportion of PFAS which is only detected using the TF method, which is probably not going to be detected with the targeted method. So watch the space. Come to the next one. We'll have some interesting things for you, hopefully.
And one other question was, how much, I believe IF is inorganic fluorine, were you finding in relation to the total fluorine?
Sure. So we know that there is some inorganic fluorine in certain types of cosmetics. It's generally low. However, there are some cosmetic types where it's really high. So, for example, things like toothpaste have 1,000 parts per million fluorine in them, inorganic fluorine in them in some cases. So the method is not necessarily a one-size-fits-all, and that's why if you get a positive using a total fluorine method, it's sometimes useful to explore using targeted analysis methods whether that fluorine is from PFAS that are things that people care deeply about and which are very highly regulated and restricted, or if it may in fact be something that's less worrisome, that might be inorganic perhaps.
Great. Jacob, I just have a question. And what do you think of the turnaround time of a sample in this particular methodology, targeted methods? How long would that take?
Sure. It's going to vary slightly from laboratory to laboratory, and perhaps depending on how busy they are as well. It's something that we're yet to formalize exactly what the turnaround would be, but I imagine it will be comparable to a number of other targeted residue methods. So some laboratories might be able to do it within a few days. Some might take a couple of weeks, perhaps. It will be somewhere on that spectrum, I suspect.
And do you feel that that any type of PFAS detected in formulas, it's possible that perhaps it came from the container itself, and you would have to look at the leaching of PFAS into the formula?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good question. So 100%. There's quite a lot of literature that shows that a lot of packaging materials of all different types have PFAS in them. Some of that is mobile, and it can be leached from those packaging materials, and it can find its way into whatever is in that packaging. And that may be the case with cosmetics. So you might have, if you're using a recycled plastic that has PFAS in it, or if you have a cardboard carton that's been coated with something that has a stain or grease repellency, that might be, for example, because of PFAS that could leach out. But equally, there are some PFAS that are immobile and are sort of fixed into those containers. So it could be anywhere on that spectrum again. Yeah.
Perfect. We have one other question from someone who says, which specific PFAS compounds pose the greatest analytical challenges in different cosmetic formulations, such as creams, powders, and lipsticks?
Sure. Good question. I mean, they're all challenging, right? So PFAS testing, most people know, is hard. It's difficult. There are a number of challenges to it. The shorter chain ones can be a little difficult. Some of them don't have as many ways to measure them with a mass spec. They don't have as many ions that you can measure. And sometimes the background levels are a little more difficult to manage. But then equally, some of the longer chain PFAS are are quite challenging to extract from certain types of samples as well. So if you have a really big, long PFAS that is really lipophilic and really loves to be in oils and fats and greases and things, then it can be very challenging to extract those from a matrix type, which is itself very lipophilic. So like a lipstick, for example, that can be very challenging to get long chain PFAS out of. But there are challenges across the board. And it's certainly a challenging area.
I know one of the challenges, Jacob, and without having to reveal too much about the methodology, one of the challenges that I know you came up with was just the different type of matrices. Some of them posed a big challenge to you because of the lipophilic nature of the formulas, and you had to come up with different methodology to address some of these formulas. And remember, uh, cosmetics are a little bit different than the environmental samples in which you're typically looking at maybe soil and water. There's so many different matrices, as many of you understand, from very liquid type cosmetic products all the way to solids, to very waxy materials. And Jacob, maybe just touch base or touch a little bit on some of the challenges you did have with some of
Sure.
those products.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's fine. So like Barry said, the range of chemical characteristics in cosmetics is really high. So you have some cosmetics which are wholly or mainly water, for example, and they're relatively straightforward. So things like cleansers or tonics, for example, are mostly water, and they're not as complex, for example, to do as something like a lipstick or a mascara or a lip gloss, which is wholly or mainly sort of oils and waxes and lipids and things. And when you have that diverse of a range of character, some things that are very hydrophilic and some things that are very lipophilic, it's very difficult to construct a sort of one-size-fits-all method to be able to extract PFAS from all those things. But we've invested the time and the effort, and we've come up with something that does do pretty much exactly that. It can extract PFAS from every type of cosmetic that we've tried so far. And beyond that simple spectrum of hydrophobicity and sort of lipophilicity, there is the range of other characteristics as well is quite wide. So you have things that are powders. Some of them are free-flowing powders, like talcum powder. Some of them are sort of compacted powders, like eyeshadows, for example, where it's something like a talc or a mica that's been doped with oils and greases to sort of congeal it together, for want of a better word. And there are things that are very aggressively mineral, like toothpaste. There are things that are very, very highly organic, like sunblocks, for example, that have extraordinarily high concentrations of particular non-PFAS chemicals in them, the UV filters and such. And they cause all sorts of issues when you present them to an LCMS system. Not to mention the pigments that are in anything that's colored, the surfactants that are in many things to stabilize them, things that are emulsified, your moisturizers that can be water and oil or oil and water and have some collection of lipids, some collection of surfactants, to hold the lipids in some sort of micellar kind of format. So it is a really dizzying array of chemistry, and it's quite a challenging area, in fact. But we think we've got it pretty well sorted with all the time and effort that we've invested into it.
Well, thank you, Jacob. I think we have time for maybe one more question, and we have one here that says, in practice, which analytical instruments are most commonly used for PFAS detection in cosmetics, and what level of accuracy and sensitivity can labs realistically achieve?
Sure, good question. So if you look in the literature, so the scientific literature shows that probably the main tool or the most common tool that gets used is LCMS. So liquid chromatography, mass spectrometry is very widely used for targeted quantitation of particular PFAS. Now, the next group or category of analyses that get done is for total fluorine. In the literature, there are quite a wide range of tools that are used for that, and they're not all ones that are commercially accessible or available in commercial laboratories. So you'll find lots of literature that's published that uses nuclear techniques, like at a nuclear reactor, to irradiate cosmetic samples and detect the gamma rays and neutrons and things that come off them. Commercial laboratories don't do that because we don't have nuclear reactors, because they cost billions of dollars. So we use CIC, combustion ion chromatography, quite often instead. Beyond those two techniques, you see a little bit of gas chromatography being used for some of the volatile PFAS. And those are probably the main three categories, I would say.
Perfect. And maybe we can squeeze this one in. What kind of sample extraction method could be used, and what solvents?
Yep. So I won't go into too much detail about exactly what we've decided to do, but it is suffice to say that because of the diverse range of chemical characteristics of cosmetics, you have to be very deliberate with the choice of extraction method that is used. So you have to very carefully choose the extraction solvents, and you have to very carefully choose and validate the way that those solvents are used to pull PFAS out of samples. So the exact details about how we do that is special sauce that I'm not going to tell everyone, but you do have to be quite careful with it, yes.
Thank you, Jacob. I think we can wrap up here. I just personally want to thank all of you who attended today. We appreciate the time you've taken out of your day to attend this webinar. I think you can recognize from Jacob's discussion how much work has went into identifying methodology designed to help detect the presence of PFAS in cosmetics. When we first started this project many months ago, we had no methodology. The existing methodology wasn't working, and we couldn't get it to work. And Jacob and his team diligently set out to find new methodology to detect PFAS in cosmetics, and we feel that we have a really good solution for the cosmetic and personal care industry. So on that, if you do have any questions, please reach out to either Jacob or myself. We'll be happy to answer any questions you have. Going forward, if you do see a need for doing PFAS testing or total fluorine testing, again, reach out to us. We're happy to help you. And thanks again for taking time out of your busy day.
Cool. Thank you, Barry.
Thank you, Jacob.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you, everybody. I want to thank everybody for attending. Again, as Barry kind of stated, you can contact him or Jacob if you have any other questions. Again, look out for the recording, and contact information will also be shared within that email. Everybody, I hope you have a great week.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
You all.
Thanks. Bye.